See you soon. See you, Jenna.
So I based my intro on the last one.
Okay.
I'll go slowly.
Okay. So we have some people joining us. Started. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Chelsea Green Publishing's In Conversation series, where we bring great minds together for lively discussions. If this is your first time joining us, my name is Jenna Stewart, and I'm the author events manager for Chelsea Green. The events usually run for about 45 minutes to an hour, and we'll have a question and answer period at the end, so please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box, which is preferred versus the chat because they get lost. So if you have a specific question, definitely put it in the Q&A box, but please chat too. That's wonderful. Today we are lucky to have Ruairi McKiernan, author of Hitching for Hope, A Journey into the Heart and Soul of Ireland. And joining him is Stephen Long from the New York Irish Center. So great to have you, Stephen. It would be great if you could just start us off by telling us a little bit about what you do and the center's role in the community.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Jenna. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon to those of you joining us in New York and across the United States. And good evening to everyone in Ireland. Thanks for joining us today. This is going to be part of the New York Irish Center's Between the Lines conversation series, in which we'll have prominent writers from the US and abroad come on, discuss their books, discuss their writing, their process, etc. And we're happy to welcome Ruairi McKiernan for another stop on his virtual book tour as part of his own release of Hitching for Hope. My name is Stephen Long, as Jenna said, and I'm the Director of Arts and Culture with the New York Irish Center. So for those of you who don't know, the New York Irish Center is a cultural and social services organization. We're located in Long Island City, New York, just a stop from Grand Central. We offer a variety of cultural activities for all ages, including music, language and dance classes, theatrical performances, book, play, and poetry readings, music sessions, and a lot more. We've also curated a robust social service program with a keen focus on the seniors in our community. Our staple is a weekly lunch, which offers seniors the chance to get out of the house, socialize a little bit, and it lets us keep an eye on them as well. We offer activities for them, our classes, clubs, card games. It's all a means to keep the seniors engaged and active. Obviously, like everyone else, we've had to adapt with the current conditions brought on by the pandemic. So in lieu of the center hosting the weekly meal, we organized a weekly lunch delivery to about 55 seniors across New York. We also got involved as a founding organization in an initiative called Sláinte 2020. This is where we worked with Irish communities in New York, across the States, and back in Ireland as well, to raise money for a bit of a fund that then we used to disperse money to those in dire need. Especially at the beginning of the pandemic, when so many businesses had to close their doors, we found a lot of people out of work. This included a lot of people out of status, so they weren't eligible for government assistance. And we were able to put together this fund, and we helped them pay their rent, pay bills, and even put food on their table. So as we've adapted our social services for a world in COVID, we've started to adapt our cultural programs as well. And with Ruairi's talk today, it ushers in a new era of hybrid events. And we're thrilled to have the chance to work with him. And the team at Chelsea Green Publishing have been amazing. And I'm really looking forward to today's talk. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoy.
Thanks, Stephen.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Jenna. And hello, everyone from Lahinch, County Clare, in the west of Ireland. You can probably see just behind me there the hills of County Clare, and the sun is just going down here. It's sorry, the lighting's gone a little bit wonky here. It's just after 7 in the evening, and the sun's going down, and it's a lovely evening. I'm really grateful for everyone's time for tuning in tonight. Or this afternoon rather. I have to get my time zones right. Like many people, I'm still getting used to the virtual realities, but I'm also very grateful for it. I'm grateful for this opportunity for us all to gather here. I'm imagining us all in a room together sitting around. We've got a fireplace in the back. I might light it if it gets cold. Thankfully, it isn't cold, but it's definitely autumn weather here in Clare. For those that don't know me, I'll give you a little bit of background as to who I am, and then I'll start talking a little bit about my new book, Hitching for Hope. But I do want to encourage the use of the chat facility, both here in the Zoom facility, but also on Facebook Live where it's streaming. And Jenna and Stephen are going to keep an eye on any comments and questions. But I'd love to know where people are tuning in from, what part of New York or the US or Ireland or elsewhere. I want to get a sense that we're all in a community here together. And this book and much of what I'm going to be talking about in the next 45 minutes or so is all centered around the theme of community. I'm going to speak and read a little bit from the book, and then we're going to open it up to the floor for lots of questions. And I'm very happy to say that I've got a special guest. It's a bit of a last minute decision or opportunity. I bumped into a really good friend of mine earlier today, and he happens to be a really renowned musician, singer, songwriter, and he's got a really fantastic new folk song out. And he's going to be entering the building here behind me in the next while. So he hasn't arrived yet, but if you do hang out for the next 50 minutes or so, you'll get to see this very special guest. So thanks again for joining, folks. Please do use the chat facility. And I'm really grateful for your time, particularly at this time in the world. And there's a lot of flux, a lot of turbulence, and a lot of pressure on people. I'm originally from a small town called Cootehill in County Cavan, near enough the border of North and South. I suppose growing up in that area did influence my thinking to some degree. Small town life in Ireland, for a start, was very community orientated, and my parents are very community orientated people. So that absolutely influenced who I am and a lot of my journey. But also seeing the conflict unfold up north, certainly not firsthand, but being aware of the border and the militarization gave me a social, political and historical lens on the world, something that has stayed with me to this day. From there, I ended up studying business at university in Scotland. I ended up working for a few multinational companies in San Francisco, in the US, in Australia and elsewhere. Later moved to Canada. So there's quite a North American theme in my journey. And from there, I ended up in Donegal. I suppose that was a seminal turning point because I decided then in my mid-20s that I really wanted to dedicate myself to community-oriented change. I felt deeply passionate that there were so many challenges, problems, struggles in the world that I felt compelled to do something about it, or at least find a way that I felt I could be of some kind of service. And I suppose I'm still on that journey. I'm still trying to figure out how I can be best of service. I can't pretend that I have anything at all figured out. And I will say here now that the more I know, the less I seem to know. And it seems to be that that is the journey. Now, it's not to say I haven't discovered a lot of things that work in social change, and I feel I have in founding an organization that it's called Spun Out. It was a national youth organization, still exists. I built that up over a number of years with some great colleagues and friends and allies. And from there, I've helped found and co-found several other nonprofits and been involved in various campaign movements, always from a non-political perspective in terms of not being aligned to any particular group, party or ideology, but very much rooted in the idea of community and people joining together. And it was really exciting to hear the work that Stephen's talking about there in the New York Irish Centre. And I think for me, that's the type of sensibility, ethos and ethics that we need to celebrate and augment and elevate in the world right now, is that coming together, catching each other's backs, particularly the more vulnerable amongst us. So absolutely commend the New York Irish Centre and thank them for hosting me here today. And indeed, there's a variety of Irish centres all around the world. And I think that's something very special about Ireland, that we have a history and culture of migration and emigration rather. And that includes my own family and probably most Irish families. And hopefully it gives us a global outlook in the world. And hopefully it also gives us an empathy in the world in terms of people that are more marginalized and struggling in whatever way that might be. I'll get started as to a little bit of the backstory of this particular book. It starts off at a period in my life. Many people will be aware of the so-called Celtic Tiger. It was an economic phenomenon, I guess, where Ireland went from one of the poorest countries in Europe to one of the richest, at least on paper. And it was a time of great economic and social change just in the last 15 years or so. And I suppose I came of age during that period. And it was then that I suppose I started to ask questions when I realized that there was a lot of positives happening in terms of social change in Ireland, but there was also a lot of negatives in terms of the lifestyle and pressures, and particularly the mental health pressures that were being put on people. And that was the work that I was directly involved in with young people and spun out, is looking at how young people can be cherished, supported, minded, and empowered in finding their own voice. And what I was noticing was that, and what the studies were showing, was that there was a huge amount of stress and distress amongst young people. And you could argue that that's across the whole of society. So I had a particular interest in mental health, but as it turns out, my own journey of being involved in leading an organization then did lead to burnout. And I suppose that's, in many ways, is on a mental health spectrum in itself, is that it led to fatigue, it led to exhaustion, it led to confusion, and it led to a sense of, I suppose, feeling a degree of being a bit lost, you know, and the tank was empty. And at the same time, that's when the Celtic Tiger was collapsing. There was mass unemployment, mass emigration in Ireland once again, and a time of great despair. And I started to think about emigration myself again. I mean, it's in the Irish psyche to move and to find new opportunities elsewhere. And you probably saw the car driving by there. The special guest is arriving. So I guess I was looking for answers, and I was ultimately looking for hope in my own life. I had a very good life by all means, and lots of opportunities in front of me. President Michael D. Higgins had appointed me to the Council of State. You know, the world was my oyster, but I couldn't really find a way of slotting in or finding my own rhythm, or finding a way of working in the world where I could also be content and not burn myself out. That seemed to be my tendency, to overwork and overpush. And that's common amongst many people, particularly in the community world, but across society as well. And I'm thinking of parents, and I'm thinking of people with trying to hold down jobs and mortgages and families. Like, modern life is particularly stressful. So entered the setting of leaving the organization and not knowing where to go next, and thinking about emigration, and deciding to go around Ireland, and then feeling the call to do so through hitchhiking. Hitchhiking was something that most or many rural Irish people grew up with, and by necessity. You know, we weren't a rich country. Not everyone had a car. Certainly families didn't necessarily have two cars anyway. And hitchhiking was a means to an end of getting to A to B, you know. And I used to hitchhike to sports, football, rugby training, different events. And, you know, right from I was 13, 14, 15, 16, at one point I started hitchhiking home from school. And I suppose at this time, the idea of hitchhiking around Ireland came back to me, because I felt the call to adventure. I felt drawn to getting back on the road, but particularly finding an organic, real and raw way of connecting with people and listening to people. So I called it a listening trip. And I then decided, this name just came to me, Hitching for Hope. And so off I went on the road with no idea where I was going to go, no idea where I was going to stay, no idea who I'd meet. It was just really surrendering to the world. And I think there's a certain, there's something in that, you know, there's something to be said for letting go when you don't know, to just have the humility to surrender and trust that the path ahead will unfold. So I'm going to start by doing a little bit of reading. I have to confess, I'm still getting used to the old reading in public and reading on the Zoom and reading on the screen. So please go easy on me if I'm not the full slick operation here. I know you'll be forgiving. And again, I'll remind anyone that's joining in, please do tell me where you're joining in from. I'd love to get a sense of where people are coming from. I see people in Queens in New York, and different parts of New York there, and someone in Sligo. So it's great to get the vibes of different people in different parts. So I'm going to try and give this a lash to kickstart a little bit of reading. And we'll open it up for some questions and dialogue in a little while. So this is just a little bit of backstory in the pre-Hitching life. So this is when I was 13 years old. And it says, one afternoon when I was 13 years old, I attracted the attention of some bullies as I rode the bus home from school. The older guys sneakily tied the cords of my coat to the seat so that when I tried to get up, I found myself stuck and missed my stop. I was raging, and it seemed as if everyone was laughing at me just what I needed on top of the vulnerability I already felt being new to the area. However, what was then a humiliating experience soon opened up the door to a new world of possibility. From that day on, with a cautious blessing from my parents, hitching became my primary mode of school transport until my family eventually moved closer to town. But hitching was not just only a means of avoiding confrontation with school bullies. It wasn't just for fun or adventure. It was mainly a practical way of getting from one place to the other. Back then, fewer people owned cars and public transport was scarce. Hitchhiking was a natural alternative in those quieter, slower times when people weren't so wary of lending a hand. You might end up waiting a long time in the rain, but eventually you'd reach your destination. Community spirit was a prominent feature of life in decades past. In part out of necessity, people stuck together or perished alone. Neighbours often helped each other through the mehel, the old Irish term for work sharing. My grandmother used to tell us stories about the neighbours who helped build her family's house. Offering the same kindness in return, my grand's family would pitch in with farm work so the wheel of reciprocity and interdependence kept turning. Hitchhiking always felt to me like a natural part of this web of interconnectedness. It exemplifies that sense that we're all in it together, that we can pick someone up when they need help, as it might be us that someday we need help tomorrow. Sorry, I skipped a beat there. I experienced this each Saturday morning during my teens when I would hitchhike 24 kilometers from Cootehill to Cavan Town to play rugby. I usually ended up walking and waiting for half an hour or more before getting a lift, and the same on the way back, but I thought nothing of it. In an era before smartphones or the internet, it was as if I had all the time in the world. In later years, hitching opened up the world to me when I traveled in Scotland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and West Africa. I gained insight into other people and cultures and developed confidence, conversational skills, and the capacity for trust. Times changed though. As the years passed, hitching slowly disappeared from my life and seemingly the world around me. The more money I earned, the lazier I became, opting for comfort and convenience over the occasional hardships of thumbs-out travel. And as the Irish economy blossomed, people bought cars and public transport improved somewhat. Urbanization, individualism, and the pressures of modern life also set in. And with these, hitchhiking faded into the past. The demise of hitching was aided by movies and news reports that pushed a particular narrative, suggesting hitchhikers might be dangerous people or that they themselves stood a good chance of being attacked by opportunistic drivers. I wasn't entirely immune to the fear factor. I understood that safety could be a concern, especially for women. My experiences as a man could not compare, a sobering reminder that not all is equal and just in the world. I'd encountered a few creepy drivers over the years, and while I managed to get away from them by trusting my gut and asking to be dropped off early, these kinds of experiences had left me skeptical, cynical, and more cautious than I desired. Keeping an open heart was important to me. I'd always loved that line in the Edgar Guest poem, Fate, that reads, "Strangers are friends that we someday may meet." I'd seen though how easy it was to become closed off in order to protect myself. When I first told people of my plans to hitchhike around Ireland, common responses included, "Aren't you afraid of being murdered?" And "Nobody hitchhikes anymore." Whether hitchhiking was dead or not was a valid question, and one that I was keen to investigate. I didn't doubt that dangers existed, but I also wasn't fully convinced that people were now too busy, mistrustful, or selfish to bother giving lifts. I liked the idea of challenging conventional wisdom, of putting my thumb out to the nation to see what it stood for. In doing so, I would be reconnected with my youthful openness, healing old wounds, and inviting my country to reveal itself. So there you go, folks. That's the kind of I suppose the early influences of hitchhiking and the world that it seemed to be a metaphor, you know, the kind of world of a kind world, a community orientated world, a world where people were really watching out for each other. And when we look at what's going on in the world right now, so much polarity, so much division, certainly greed and the idea that, you know, we have to just row our own boat rather than row together. You can see how hitchhiking can kind of invoke a sense of a different time or a different land. And it's not to say that, you know, the dangers or the perils or the risks or the inequalities aren't real. They absolutely are. But my experience in this trip in Hitchhiking for Hope and Hitching for Hope was that I met that community. I met that kindness. I met that Ireland that I feel still exists. And in many ways, I feel that world still exists. And I feel that we can call forward that world by going on the road, you know, not necessarily through hitchhiking, but in our own lives and together by adventure, by putting the invitation out to the other, by asking for help, by seeing where the road needs to bring us. So I'm going to continue with shorter stories next time. That one was a little bit long. I'm going to start with a tiny little story of an American friend of mine who is called Sonny Jacobs. And I met Sonny just as I set out on the road. Sonny lives in Connemara now, but she's originally from the US. So I visited my mum just before I set out on the road. And so this chapter starts with, I'm going to yoga with Sonny this evening. You should come, my mother said when I finally returned to her house. I wasn't enthusiastic. My head was in a bit of a spin and I needed to slow down, get organized and prepare for the trip ahead. However, I knew yoga would help ground me a bit. Besides, if this trip was about hope, it would be perfect to meet up again with the teacher, Sonny Jacobs. I'd first come across Sonny in a newspaper article years earlier. Her beaming smile shone out of me from the page, as did her touching message of love and forgiveness that accompanied her roller coaster story of tragedy and triumph. Originally from the US and now in her late 60s, Sonny had served 17 years in prison for a crime she didn't commit. During this time, her husband was executed in the electric chair. Her children were taken into foster care. Her parents died in a plane crash, and she spent 5 years in solitary confinement. Yet, despite these horrific experiences, here she was making space for people to experience yoga and meditation. The practices, she says, offered her a chance to find true freedom in the face of her incarceration. It's a great thing you're doing, Ruairi, she said to me as I left her class that evening. You know, so many people have faced huge hardships in different ways. Often one of the best things you can do for them is to listen to them, to bear witness to their story. Being listened to and believed, that's something that can help people find hope. I was struck by Sonny's message and resolved that if nothing else, I would seek to bear witness to whoever I might meet on the road ahead. So it's a powerful story, Sonny's. Every time I think of it. Her book is called Stolen Time, if anybody's interested. And if you excuse me for a second, I need to turn on a light. It's 1 second, folks. Sorry about this. Yeah, I'm still here. Oh, it's hard running a TV production studio and reading and doing everything all at once. So thanks for your patience on this. I got a fancy lighting system behind me, but as I said, the light has gone down behind me. So yeah, check out Sonny's book, Stolen Time. It's an incredible story. So we're going to continue now and we will get into some questions. So you can start firing in some questions or reflections yourself into the chat in Facebook or in Zoom. And Jenna will keep an eye on those and invite Stephen to keep an eye if there's any coming from his direction as well. And I'd love to hear your own perspectives, your own thoughts. And hello to folks in Toms River, New Jersey, in California, in Buffalo, in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, Queen Jersey, yeah, loads of places. So yeah, we've got a nice little community gathering here. So thanks again for joining in, folks. So I'm going to continue on the road here. I ended up on Inishbofin Island, and this is my first night on the road. This is on past Oughterard and in through Connemara, and ended up on the ferry and Inishbofin Island, where I camped out at the back of a hostel, a backpackers hostel. And we're going to kick off this now. It's a short enough story, so is it? Apologies again, folks. I have it here. Okay, so a furious howling and banging shook me from my sleep. What the hell is going on, I thought, panicking momentarily as I struggled to remember where I was. It didn't take long for the fierce Atlantic wind and rain to remind me that I was inside my tiny tent. I'd fallen asleep only to be awoken before dawn by this ferocious storm. Keep in mind, folks, this is summertime in Ireland, as many of you will know. The weather isn't always our friend. So I lay there shivering, hoping that I might somehow get back to sleep. At 5:30 a.m., after an optimistic half hour, I gave up. How quickly the romance fades, I noted as I made my way towards the hostel's main door, which I could only hope had been left open. The previous day had flowed so smoothly. Now here I was, starting the day cold, wet and tired, feeling foolish for having turned down a warm bed. Thankfully, the front door was open and I decided to make a hot drink for myself in the kitchen to warm up. The idea was soon torpedoed by a locked door and a sign that read, "The kitchen opens at 8 a.m. daily." I stood there licking my wounds, trying to imagine how I might get through the locked door to the hot coffee I imagined lay beyond. Just as I had run out of ideas and started to plan my escape from the island on the first ferry out, a hallway door opened and out bounced a cheery, bearded man. "Good morning to you," he exclaimed. "How are you? Did you arrive last night?" The man, Brendan, looked to be in his 50s, but he had the energy of a spring lamb despite having slept in a tent just out the back, just as I tried to do. I hadn't noticed him on the opposite end of the campsite. "Would you like a coffee?" he asked, revealing that he had the keys to the kitchen. Suddenly the day had taken a new twist. "What about some porridge? Let me get you some porridge. I have a special recipe that you have to taste. It's got a mix of the best Irish oats with stewed cinnamon, fennel seeds, bananas, blackberries. You won't find better," he exclaimed as my stomach sang with happiness. As we entered the kitchen, I told Brendan about my experience of being pummeled by the previous night's storm, which he seemed to survive unscathed. As it turned out, he had the help of a luxurious inflatable mattress and 2 sleeping bags, one a metre wide at the foot. "You're not set up right at all, Ruairi. You need to get the right gear. I sleep really well each night. Besides, I'm exhausted after all my daily activities," he said. Within minutes, my self-pity had evaporated and I was sipping hot coffee and eating what seemed like Ireland's best porridge as Brendan gave me the lowdown. "I love it here," he told me, explaining that he was staying on Inishbofin for the summer and helping out in the hostel. "I go for a run in the mornings and then I go out on the kayak and I do a bit of fishing and then cooking in the evening. It's a great life," he said, his eyes sparkling. I was made redundant from work in November. So now I have the time. I've been coming to the island for years and this was the first opportunity to come for a season. So I'm grabbing with open arms. It was refreshing to meet someone with such a zest for life. And I warmed to Brendan quickly as he continued to share his story. "I'm a fishing enthusiast and a forager, and all this activity has left me immensely fulfilled. There's an abundance of life in and around the island, like cockles and winkles and shrimp. Basically every day, all I'm concerned about is the next meal. I was 17 years at the one company. They were looking for voluntary redundancies, but nobody volunteered. I knew I was vulnerable. I was at an awkward age and I was replaceable. I had the feeling that the company was going to pick me, and they did. The most important thing is I still have my health," Brendan concluded with a sense of heartfelt gratitude. Eventually, I got round to the question of hope. While Brendan wasn't keen to discuss the state of the nation, a topic he said bored the hell out of him, a topic that bored the hell out of him. As he spoke, he revealed himself to be a deep thinker with a big heart. "I don't envy people who are struggling," he said. "I come from an estate close to my Ross in Limerick. I saw a lot of underprivileged kids who will never get the opportunities I'm enjoying, which isn't a lot, just basic outdoor pursuits. That's very sad. I took 5 city kids out fishing last year and got them involved in gutting the fish. I got them to cook the fish presented on saucers and offer the fish to their parents. They've been eating fish since. It was a massive experience for them. It was a massive experience for me too. And to be able to contribute at the awkward age they're at. It's a tough age around 15 years old. They'll remember it and the old guy who brought them out. For me, hope comes down to simplicity, just simplicity. When I told Brendan I'd been thinking of taking the first boat out, he wasn't having any of it. Now come on, you're only just arrived. A few of us are cooking up a big dinner of fresh fish tonight and you should stay and join us. Besides, you haven't even seen any of the island yet. How could I say no to this man? It was still early morning and already the kindness had transformed my day and had me feeling excited about the trip again. Sure, why not? I responded. Thanks, Brendan. I really appreciate it. I'll see you this evening. So Brendan is just one of hundreds of people I met on this trip around Ireland. And, you know, it was just a case of being met with, you know, we used the term Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes, for good reason, because once upon a time it was ingrained, and I'd like to think it still is ingrained in our culture in Ireland. And it is in many cultures, a culture of hospitality, and particularly hospitality for the stranger. And that even seems like a countercultural notion at the moment when we're taught to fear the stranger. So Brendan and me were the strangers embracing each other. But in doing so, and I found this with so many people I met, people wanted to be heard. They wanted to be listened to, you know. And Brendan went on to share more of his own story and his own struggles. And throughout the book and throughout the trip, people did open up to me and they shared so many stories of love, loss, hardship, separation, unemployment, businesses collapsing, losing their homes. And I suppose that's one of the big themes is the idea that there's a lot of suffering out there. I think we know that from our media, but we also know it from our own lives, that suffering is just seems to be part of the human experience. But increasingly so, the pressures are vast on people. But also too, one of the big themes emerging was the idea of resilience, the idea that people are strong, the idea that people want to talk about it, they want to be heard, and that there's a great healing in people hearing each other, you know, healing in hearing. So that continued everywhere I met, you know, and it wasn't just like Brendan, it wasn't just stories of woe, it was stories of hope and possibility, stories of kindness and stories of courage, stories of people that were determined to not be victims, determined to find other pathways, and the pursuit of simplicity as well, you know, that idea of just going fishing and camping and maybe going back to some of the notions of our childhood. It's not to romanticize all the past of our parents and grandparents, because God knows they had very hard times. There's no doubt about that. But there was a simplicity to life, you know, and I think a lot of people are craving that. I've seen that in my own work. I've seen a lot of anxiety. I've seen a lot of people suffering from depression. And I think there's a mass desire to step back. And, you know, I'm not going to pontificate or lecture as to how people might do that. And I'm certainly not one for disengaging with the modern world. I welcome all the mod cons and gadgets and technology, and it's fantastic that we're here. Hello to Hamilton, Ontario. I think we might have Ronan and Sonia in Hamilton, and more folks joining in from different places in the US, Canada and Ireland. So you're all welcome as people continue to join. And again, feel free to comment and ask any questions. So we're going to open it up very soon, but one or two, I'll do one or two kind of more very short stories, if that's okay. I'd love to be in the room with you to see you and to get a sense if I'm on the right track here, but I'll assume we're doing all right. So next up, I'm gonna go to the wolf. And this actually does bring us to North America. Okay. So I decided to head north towards Linan, a picturesque village on the, this was after Inishbofin. I decided to head north towards Linan, a picturesque village on the Galway-Mayo border, and take things from there. That was the plan, at least. Half an hour later, I was soaking wet from the rain. Now, by the way, I do want to say it's sunny for most of this trip, and it's not all miserable storms and rain. Just the start was a bit soaky. So anyway, back to the story here. Okay, I'll start again. Thanks. Jesus. I decided to head north towards Linan, a picturesque village on the Galway-Mayo border, and take things from there. That was the plan, at least. Half an hour later, I was soaking wet from the rain, realizing that the chances of a lift on a road with no traffic were pretty slim. I backtracked and chanced my luck on the R344, an alternative route that cuts through the heart of Connemara. I was just making myself comfortable in a new hitching spot when a couple in a small red car pulled up and offered me a lift. By the way, I only had to ever wait like 5, 10, 20 minutes max. I jumped inside, grateful to be out of the rain and curious about my temporary hosts. I'm not going to do the accent here because I'll fail. Anyway, there's an accent. We're on our way to a camping trip with our friends, the young woman in the passenger seat said in a strong Polish accent. Yes, great camping weather, as you can see, joked her boyfriend. I like it here a lot, the woman remarked. Ireland is so beautiful and people are friendly. Well, most people are, she added. But you know, I don't think about politics and the future and all of that too much. I just do my job as a waitress, meet my friends and try to enjoy things. I try to keep things simple. There's that theme of simplicity again. I try to keep things simple. So I'm probably not a good person to talk to for your trip, she concluded. That only encouraged me. I believe everyone has wisdom to share and stories to tell, so I wasn't going to let her away that easily. Sure enough, she was a qualified psychologist and with an interesting perspective on the human mind. As I said, I like to keep things simple, she said. Life doesn't need to be so complicated. So much of the negativity is from around watching the news and believing too much that politics is the reality. I know it's important, but it's not the total reality. Reality is whatever you make it for yourself. It's like that story of the two wolves. You know the one, she asked. I told her I wasn't familiar. It's an old Cherokee story, she said, a Native American Cherokee story. A grandparent is telling their grandchild that there are two wolves fighting for control of our minds. One is filled with fear, envy, greed, anger, and hate. The other is loving, kind, humble, peace-loving, and generous. The grandchild becomes worried and wants to know which wolf is going to win. The grandparent says, the one that will win is the one that you will feed. Far from not having anything to say, this woman had shared one of the most powerful stories I'd heard so far, one I wish the entire nation could hear. The myth sums up so much for me, she ended. There's a battle for our minds, from within and without. And ultimately, it's up to us to be clear about our response to that. So I think you can probably see the relevance to that particularly myth. I think myth is very important as well. You can see the relevance in the world today as we face mental health challenges and certainly any amount of political, cultural and social pressures. And I'll throw in ecological pressures into the mix on that. But the one thing we have in common in that is our own response and our own ability to act, react, and our own agency to make decisions as to what news, media, and perspectives we consume, and whether we take control and decide to be empowered and active in our response or decide to be victims. So I think the myth introduces an interesting proposition. And, you know, when I said there at the end of that story that I wish the whole nation could hear it, when we get to the end of the book, I was invited onto one of the biggest national radio shows in Ireland. And the broadcaster asked me, the presenter asked me which story came to mind that I'd like to share. And I ended up sharing this lady's story. This woman who said she didn't really have much to share, I ended up sharing it with hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people. So it was great. So folks, we're going to open it up for a few questions, if anyone has any. And I'd invite Jenna or Stephen or both to jump in if you feel you would like to hear any more perspectives on anything. And I'll remind people to hang tight because I have a very special guest and some great original Irish soul, folk, power music that's going to be coming your way to sing us out. We'll try and finish on time. I don't know if Jenna or Stephen, if we end up going a few minutes over, we'll try and finish on time, but I want to respect all your time. And I want to say a huge thanks to everyone for supporting this event and for tuning in and giving your ears and your eyes and supporting Hitching for Hope. It's available on paperback as an ebook and an audiobook as well. So there's lots we can talk about. I'm happy to answer any questions or hear your own perspectives. Use the chat facility. And thanks, Mary, for your comment there. Can't wait to get the book. Fair play. Lovely to hear from you all. So if there's any questions, I'll open it up to Jenna and I'll get my musician friend. I think he'll be tuning up shortly to come on screen. So thanks again.
Yeah. Mary wants to know, is there any one character that sticks out during your journey who made the greatest imprint on you, positive or negative?
Ooh.
I want to hear both, the positive and the negative.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's not see them as positives or negatives. that they're all positive in their own way, you know. I guess I am thinking of a young farmer that I met in a mart, a cattle animal mart, which are increasingly becoming a thing of the past. But I'm trying to just look at my notes here, so give us a second. There is a story about this young farmer, and he really, sorry about this, 48. Okay, so, so I'm in this farmers market, and I'm trying to engage farmers of different age groups in hearing their views. But, you know, imagine me, just this random guy walking around trying to chat to people. Not everyone wanted to talk to me, and a lot of them were skeptical or cynical, or I didn't blame them. But I did get, you know, one guy pretty much told me to get stuffed, and I start off here going, I picked myself up and resolved to try again as I continued to stroll past large huddles of men and animals bleating from their cramped pains. I lingered near a middle-aged man who was leaning against the wall talking on his mobile phone. After he finished the call, I approached. He didn't hold back. We need a revolution, the man responded, and I asked him about Ireland's future. We've been betrayed, sold off to Brussels. The free Irish man is a thing of the past. Fishing, farming, hunting, working in the bog, they're all being killed off. The big political parties, they all seem like they're part of the same machine, robbing the Irish people of their resources and handing them to their friends. I lived in England years ago, he continued, and I probably should have stayed there. In England, they value the working man. They haven't sold their own people down the same way we have, he said, his fist clenched. This isn't a political game. People are killing themselves. We're losing more and more of our people to suicide because of these policies. I know one young farmer who recently shot dead all his cattle and then himself. As far as I can see, a lot of this isn't being reported in the media, which seems to be centered mainly around what happens in Dublin. I was speechless when I read the numerous reports on men's health, rural life, and Ireland's suicide rate. This emotional testimony transformed them into something all the more real. I wondered how a man like this stayed sane, how he woke up every day and got on with things. You just have to, he replied with a serious look on his face. For your family, for your kids, what other choice do I have? Suddenly his voice calmed, his voice grew softer, and a peaceful look spread over his face. Also the music helps. I play traditional Irish music. The concertina and the warmth and spirit of music lifts my spirits and brings us together away from all that crap. There's something in the music, in the camaraderie, and it's a great antidote to all the other shite. Before I knew it, he was gone, whisked into the bustle of the mart. I was left standing there, unable to digest all that he had shared, but turning one phrase over in my mind. Something in the music, he said. I like that. So it wasn't just this man. There's a few other stories from that particular mart, and there's a young man there who talked about being on antidepressants and selling his animals and struggling in many different ways. I can actually still see the guy's eyes in my mind, and I talk about wanting to give him a hug, and then my own, I suppose, conditioned sense of masculinity thinking, no, I'm not going to hug this guy. I don't know him. He'll probably, you know, punch me or whatever. But, you know, why didn't I hug the guy? He was distressed and he was upset. This isn't this particular guy, but, you know, I just really struck by the raw emotion and honesty. There's other people. There's Jane in Wexford, who's the mother of 2 autistic kids. And Jane's husband, Rob, died since I met her in this trip on the book. And I actually had the joy of visiting her about 3 weeks ago for the first time in a few years. And people like Jane, to me, are heroes, you know. We often hold up a lot of kind of false heroes, or, you know, well, it's not to say they're all false, people who win awards and celebrity and recognition and all that. But for me, the true heroes, you don't often hear who they are. They're all amongst us. They're our mothers, our fathers, our uncles, our aunts, our cousins. There are people that are actually overcoming huge struggle, huge injustice, huge trauma, huge abuse in their life. There are people that are actually carers, caring for our most vulnerable, our most sick, our most oppressed, the people that are in distress in any given day or any given moment. So I'm sure Stephen sees heroes every day in the Irish Centre in New York. You know, there's so many community heroes, and I think a lot of them tend to be women as well, you know, and they tend to be often quiet heroes. You know, they're not looking for the limelight or the praise. So for me, I just want to honor them. I want to salute them. I want to champion them. I think the state, all governments, all states should invest in them as leaders in the community, because they're the gel and the fabric that hold our society together. And often without resources, without praise, without recognition, without support. And I met so many of them on this trip. And, you know, ultimately, these are the people that give me hope. They're the so-called ordinary, everyday people that are actually extraordinary people. They walk amongst us, and I just have so much respect. And they influence me, and they inspire me, and they energize me, and they motivate me when I see them. And as well as that, they humble me, because when I see the huge effort and the volunteerism and the hours and the sacrifice that some of these people put in to caring for society, you know, nothing compares. So any other questions, folks?
Not a question, but a really sweet comment. Another Mary says, I will be so happy to tell the story of the two wolves to my 12-year-old granddaughter who is having
nice one.
Anxiety bouts, and I always look for encouraging messages for her. Thanks so much. So a Polish woman's myth in Ireland will go from me in New York to San Francisco. That's
cool. And maybe the myth already came from, I don't know, I forgive my ignorance. I'm not sure what part of the North America, the Cherokee Nation they're from, but anyway, it belongs in your land, so to speak.
And Terry wants to know, is there another journey book in the works for you?
Oh, are we allowed to go anywhere, Terry? Like, come on. Yeah, I like Hitching on Zoom, perhaps. But no, look, I have a few ideas. I'd love to go on another trip. I have a few places in mind. I think we just need to ride out this pandemic. I also think we need to hold firm. I think we need to trust our own resilience as people, as in family and in community, and to stand firm with each other, and don't go too far inside ourselves. Don't go too insular, and also don't fall victim to a lot of the angst, hatred, conspiracy. There's a lot of kind of toxicity floating in the air. So I think we need to hold our calm and hold our nerve, and use this moment of collapse and disruption as a creative moment that we can actually create very positive and new realities. I think it's a time for dreaming and a time for creating. So I'm certainly dreaming of those new books and new travels, but I'm also using this time as constructively as I can. And you know, it's a great thing to be able to do these gatherings all around the world now through Zoom and through Facebook and elsewhere. So you know, while we might complain about being online too much, and I would encourage people to get offline as well, I try and take more and more time offline for my own sanity and my own mental health. Try and do some meditation, some jumping in the sea and swimming. And I just encourage self-care amongst us all at this particular moment, because it's a tough time for people. But yeah, long answer. Yeah, lots of projects in the pipeline. I guess finance can often be a challenge, but you know, people did chip in to keep this trip on the go. The book, Chelsea Green, an amazing publisher based in Vermont, appeared out of nowhere. Someone was listening to my podcast. It's called the Love and Courage podcast. So I think Margot and Chelsea Green heard an episode I did of that, and they appeared. And the book, I don't know, that's its own journey. I could talk about that at length, but it's been a great thing to release this book. I released the book just as Ireland locked down, 2 days after all the bookstores closed and this country shut down, and my book was locked behind closed doors for 3 months. And it just was very strange. I'm not going to say it was upsetting, because I just rallied and got it selling online, and we had online launches and hope to do lots more. So if you're involved in any library, community group event, I'm up for doing more. If anyone has any ideas, I'm up for collaborating. but yeah, it's been an interesting time to release a book about hope, and it feels like the right time, perhaps.
I wanted to note a few things you said there, Ruairí, that resonated with me. Yeah, the pandemic brought out the best in people here. Everyday heroes, like you mentioned, we do see them every day, even under normal circumstances. But in particular, when the world shut down, so many people stepped up. We were involved with another mission, so to speak, here called the Mihal mission, where we opened our doors once a week to collect PPE when there was a massive shortage of PPE in a few hospitals here in New York. And I distinctly remember seeing that word show up in your book in the first few pages. The Irish community really stepped up in such an extraordinary way, but it wasn't just the Irish either. It was everybody working together to get masks where masks were needed, gowns where gowns were needed. People who were healthy enough to take the risk before we even knew what was going on to buy groceries for their neighbors who may be elderly or sick. It was just remarkable. And to speak to your point about being insular, yeah, it's really easy to just sit on the internet all day, especially when we're on lockdown. And you can find yourself easily polarized into thinking everything is horrible.
Yeah.
We're never going to get out of this dark hole. But then all you have to do is take a look outside and see what people are doing to feel inspired once again. And then you realize I can make a difference as well. It doesn't have to be a grand heroic gesture. Yeah. It's something as simple as checking on your neighbors to make sure that they're still okay. And do they need anything?
Big time.
Yeah.
Hear, hear. Yeah. So I'm just conscious of time, folks. With our musical guest, would it be a bit of an indulgence to ask if we're okay spilling over just a couple of minutes over time? Is anyone gonna? No one's gonna fight me on that, no? Or pull the plug? Yep. I might. Yeah. Okay. So I think I haven't seen him yet because he's gone in the back door. My beautiful wife Susan has allowed him to come in the back door, and they're preparing. So, are you there, Theo? I don't know. Oh, he's here. So I'm gonna, before I bring him on screen, I'm gonna read another tiny little bit because it's quite relevant to the song, and he can say a few words if he wants, or maybe he'll just decide to sing. This particular, well, first of all, I'm going to say my goodbyes because I think this is the end of me. But I do want to say, folks, thanks again for your time. Please do buy the book. Encourage people to buy the book. It's tricky getting a book out into the world right now. There's a lot of competition and many different books out there, obviously. I'm up for collaboration for other events, for other books, for other projects. So please do get in touch. info@hitchingforhope.com, info@hitchingforhope.com. Hello to my mother who's checked in, and my mother, there's a story about my mother in the book, so you gotta love the mothers. So hello, Mom, Anne in Galway. Okay, so the story is it was down in Waterford, and I ended up staying in this old traveller, Irish Indigenous traveller wagon that a man gave to me to sleep in for the night. So I'm going to talk about this little story, and then I'm going to bring on my very special guest. So again, info@hitchingforhope.com, links to all the book on hitchingforhope.com. And thanks again. I love you all. You're brilliant. Thank you. So here we go. The village of Dunmaurice looked idyllic beside its boat-filled bay as I made my way down the hill to grab some food and catch up on some blogging before heading back to camp. I decided I'd better meet my host before it got too late. Meeting a strange hitchhiker in sunlight was undoubtedly much better than meeting one in darkness. So this guy offered me this place to stay where all his buddies were staying, and he never told them I was there. So that's the context. Arriving back at the field, I sheepishly approached a group of people who were preparing food around a fire while their children ran free using the last of their energy before bedtime. Hey, you must be Ruairí, one of the group called out. Joe told us about you. Oh, I contradict myself there. Joe told us about you. Come on over, have a cuppa with us and tell us about the trip you're on. Before long, I was back in my element, chatting with my new friends about the meaning of life before the topic turned to campfire ghost stories that possibly spooked me more than they'd spooked the children. 3 couples and the children were staying at this improvised campsite. Some lived nearby while others were visiting from farther away. One woman was taking time out from her high-pressure media career. A few were teachers and one worked as a chef by night. Our summer camping adventure is something we started doing a few years ago, said one of the women. It's great for the kids. They can run wild and we don't have to worry about them. They get to be in nature and we get to share cooking and childcare responsibilities. We come and go sometimes depending on the weather. Excuse me, mister, would you like a foot bath? Came a child's voice from behind me as I sat taking it all in. It's our nighttime foot spa ritual, his mother added, explaining that the kids collected seaweed during the day and added it to basins of hot water each night. We all do it before bed. It's very relaxing. Just as I had thought that the day couldn't get any better. Who knew such luxury was possible in a small field in the south of Ireland, I thought to myself as I slipped my feet into the warm foot bath. So much for roughing it. This was the life. We sat around the campfire for another few hours sharing stories and songs before I decided to call it a night. Lying back in the wagon, I peeked out through a small window and watched the last of the fire's flames, sending sparks into the starry night sky. Is this the way we're meant to be living, I wondered. Had the traveling people who owned the wagon lived like this once? I imagined them moving from place to place in their tight-knit communities, offering their skills as tinsmiths, musicians, and storytellers. These days, such a lifestyle may not seem realistic, but is our new way of life any more civilized? We sit in traffic, stare at screens for hours on end, and slave over an endless number of tasks so we can buy new devices that are supposed to make our lives simpler. The mass introduction of plastic killed off the demand for tinsmiths, whilst the state policy of assimilation pushed the travellers to give up their ways and settle down like the rest of us, leaving many to mourn their culture's demise while pushing them into reservation-style halting sites lacking in basic facilities. What happened to the people who'd once owned this wagon I was sleeping in? Had they continued to travel the land? Or did they end up living as settled travellers in a town or a city? I wondered if they were happy, or if they experienced the higher rates of unemployment, imprisonment, and depression that their people often faced in a country where the life expectancy for travellers is 10 years lower than the national average, and the suicide rate 6 times higher. Get along, move along, get along, move along, floated through my head the words of the Ewan MacColl song that described the plight of travellers continually forced to move on. It was a reminder of the prejudice that the traveller people, or the Mincer people, as they're known in their cant language, had faced over the years. I knew maybe I was overly romanticising things, but lying in the wagon that night, I couldn't help think that perhaps there was something in those traveller traditions, the communal life on the road and in the great outdoors, something that we could learn from amid the constant rush and push of the modern world. So folks, thanks again for joining me. I'm going to introduce a very special guest, Steve Wall, great friend of mine, originally from Dublin, Shankill, County Dublin, rude boy, bad boy, living here in rural west of Clare, now turning into a country bumpkin. Anyway, I'll bring him on screen now, folks. Can you all give it up for Steve Wall? Yeah. The crowd goes wild.
Thanks, Ruairi. And hello to everybody out there. New York, is it New York?
New York and all over.
All over. Wow. Isn't technology amazing? I'm like an old caveman with the technology. Yeah, just to say a few words on Ruairi. I've known Ruairi probably just over a year, and he's like one of these white light warrior brothers, and I'm so happy, privileged to know him. So I'll sing this song for you. This is called My People. Oh, my people, they roam those ancient fairs, bringing stories and the music of those old and ancient airs. but they tried to ban our culture and they tried to stop our ways. The spirit of a people they are trying to erase. Oh, my people, don't let them bring you down, because your rich history is written on every stone in every town. Oh, my people, don't let them keep you down, because your rich history is paved on every road in every town. On the winds of change, I can hear the lullaby of the bowed pecker dawn, with a teardrop in his eyes, and Johnny Keenan and Teddy Fury and old John Riley too. You were the guardians of our culture, and we will always remember you. Oh, my people, don't let them bring you down, because your rich history is written on every stone in every town. Oh, my people, don't let them keep you down, because your rich history is paved on every road in every town. Maggie Barty with her banjo and those ancient Gaelic airs of the piper Pat Cash. He passed the flame down through the years to Johnny Doran and Felix, those gypsy piper kings. You inspire generations, and your names will forever sing. Oh, my people, don't let them bring you down, because your rich history is written on every stone in every town. Oh, my people, don't let them keep you down, because your rich history is paved on every road in every town. Oh, my people, don't let them keep you down, because your rich history is written on every stone in every town. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Theo. Folks, that's Theo Wall, STEOWALL.com, yeah? .ie, steowall.ie, Spotify, buy direct from the artist himself.
There are people asking about buying it, so.
Oh, someone's saying, where can I buy his music? Okay, I'm going to type it into the chat box. Steo, can you buy direct there, Steo? Okay, send the money dollars to the artist. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks to Chelsea Green. Thanks to Jenna. Thanks to Stephen, New York Irish Centre, and to everyone for tuning in. And please feel free to get in touch, and hopefully we'll see each other again. I don't know if Stephen or Jenna want to say any closing remarks.
I'd just like to thank you and Steo as well. That was a nice treat at the end. Thanks so much for doing this with us today. And thank you, Jenna and Chelsea Green Publishing as well, for helping us organize this. Hopefully we can have you in person one day.
Hopefully, yeah, absolutely. Well, look at as the saying goes, this time this will pass. We will reemerge, and hopefully we reemerge in a better world, you know, and that's totally possible. The wolf of hope, as they say. So thanks again, folks. Garamila Mahagot, August Slán, and Ihawaii, and whatever time zone it is you're in. So thanks again, folks.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.